I awakened to the sound of rain pelting the roof above me. As my eyes began to focus, I found myself staring at the words, "A Bow Wow Breakfast." After a moment of confusion, I realized I was reading the side of my new food dish. What I saw when I raised my head a little was not what I personally would have described as a bow wow anything. My dish was heaped with some sort of grayish gruel that was rivaled in dreariness only by the day outside. Perhaps Chester had been right after all. "Chester," I called out over the patter of falling rain. "Chester, are you there?" "Of course I'm here," he answered churlishly. "Where do you think I'd be on a day like this? Out on the golf course perfecting my putt?" "How did you sleep?" I asked, ignoring his early morning grumpiness. By this time of our lives together, I was used to it. "Oh, fine, fine. Why should I let the incessant howling of werewolves disturb my slumber?" I didn't take up the issue of werewolves with Chester just then, because I'd finished eating my breakfast and discovered the words "Have a nice day" at the bottom of my dish. "Chester, is your food dish—" "If you're going to ask me to discuss the attack of cutes this place is suffering from, I refuse," Chester grumbled. "If I wanted my fortune told every time I ate, I could have gone to a Chinese restaurant." And with that, he let out a great sigh and went back to sleep. I could tell that any attempts at further conversation would prove futile, so I fell back asleep too, waiting for something else to happen and wishing I were back home. By the time I woke again, the rain had stopped, and the something else I had been waiting for was about to happen. Harrison and Jill were going from bungalow to bungalow, opening the doors. "Okay, animals, let's go," Harrison was saying in a bored sort of way. "Exercise time." "Oh, thank goodness it stopped raining," Jill called out. "I thought I'd go crazy if I had to spend another minute working on those charts." "There's still the office to clean," Harrison said, "and the storage shed." "Harrison," Jill replied, "we don't have to do it all today." "Oh, yes, we do," Harrison answered with some urgency. Jill put her hands on her hips and looked at Harrison with wonder. "You're really something, you know that, Harrison?" "Am I? Well, gee, thanks." "I didn't mean it as a compliment." "Oh." "I mean, you blow hot and cold. Like yesterday, all you wanted to do was sit around and read your comic books all day. Today you can't stop working, and you're driving me crazy. What's with you, anyway?" "Who knows?" Harrison replied. "Maybe I'm getting ambitious. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" He smiled in Jill's direction, revealing the remnants of that morning's breakfast neatly lodged between his two front teeth. In disgust, Jill turned away and poked her head inside my door. "Good morning, Harold," she murmured softly. "I hope you had a good sleep your first night at Chateau Bow Wow." I allowed myself to be coaxed out into the muddy outdoors. I wasn't too thrilled with the condition of the ground, but was happy just to have the chance to stretch my legs and move about. "Where is that storage shed, anyway?" Jill asked after a moment, continuing her conversation with Harrison as she unlocked Chester's door. "Out back," Harrison answered, pointing to the far corner of the compound. "Right outside the fence near Howard's bungalow." "Oh. But there's no entrance from here. You have to go around the outside wall," Harrison went on. "That's why it's such a pain to clean." Jill groaned. "That's too bad," she said, picking Chester up and stroking him. Chester's face looked like a car accident. Obviously, he had not slept well at all. "Well, I guess we better get to it." She put Chester down and headed for the gate. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Harrison asked. Jill looked blankly around her, then quizzically at Harrison. "Lyle," Harrison said simply. "You didn't let Lyle out of his bungalow." Jill shook her head slowly. "Oh, of course," she said at last. "I guess I'm just so used to Lyle getting out all by himself, it doesn't even occur to me to unlock his door anymore." I watched as she opened Lyle's door and then walked out to the gate, tripping over a small rock that was in her path. Watching her, Chester dropped his head and moaned. "All right, everybody," Harrison called out. "Hurry up and enjoy yourselves before it starts raining again." And then he went out the front gate, carefully locking it after him. Chester and I looked back to discover Max bounding spiritedly in our direction. With his natty turtleneck sweater and his square shoulders and jaw, he resembled the captain of a college football team. I remarked on my observation to Chester, whose only response was a rather anemic, "Yee team, rah rah rah." And then he added, "If he does say anything athletic, I'll scream." Max stopped abruptly before us. "Want a jog?" he blurted out. True to his word, Chester let out a blood-curdling screech and immediately turned on his heels, and Max appeared to take it in stride. "I'm Max," he said. "I'm Harold," I replied politely, "and this is, that was Chester," I added, introducing Max to Chester's retreating hindside. "Pleased to meet you both," Max said with a nod to Chester's tail. He returned his gaze to me. "So, Harold, you want to jog?" I remembered the one time I tried jogging with Pete and Mr. Monroe and had to be carried home on the back of Pete's bike. Well, no, not really," I stated emphatically. "Helps work out your aggressions," Max countered. I don't have any aggressions, I answered honestly. Max seemed disappointed. So, you don't want to jog, eh? He asked a little sadly. No, I told him again, disappointed that he was disappointed. Well, then, now's the time to start. Come on. I could see that Max was not going to be a pushover. I, on the other hand, was and always had been a pushover, so before I could say anything more, I found myself trotting, somewhat breathlessly, alongside Max. The thing is, Max said after a moment, you have to get your exercise when you can around here. They only let us out for a few hours in the afternoon. Of course, and he looked around him before he continued, it's easy to unlock the doors from the inside. Anyone can do it, Harold. Even you. Oh, thanks, I said, or at least that's what I think I said. I was having a little trouble getting my words out and breathing at the same time. In a burst, I asked, do the others know? About getting out? Oh, sure, everyone knows how to do it. I'll show you later. Lyle's the only one dumb enough to do it when Harrison and Jill are around. The rest of us wait until after supper, when they've gone home. Suddenly, Max called out, Taxi! Taxi! I thought he completely flipped. Max, I said, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but I don't think there's a cab for miles of this place. Besides, I went on between wheezes, if you're getting tired, we don't have to ride. We could just stop running. You don't understand, Max said, without once stopping to catch his breath. I'm not calling a taxi, I'm calling taxi. He nodded to my right, and I glanced over to see one of the oddest-looking dogs I'd ever encountered, waddling frantically in our direction. What kind of dog is this? I asked. Who knows, Max replied. I don't think poor Taxi himself knows for sure. He's one part of everything, I guess. He's a good mutt, though. A little on the slow side, if you get my drift. And he tends to be something of a clinging vine, but... What do you mean? I asked. Well, I don't know what it is, but some days he sticks to me like glue. Seems to think the sun rises and sets on me, Max said without apparent displeasure. Taxi joined us then, falling into step beside Max. He regarded Max with a look that was 1 degree away from idol worship. I could see what Max had meant. Hi, Max, he said. Hey, Taxi, how you doing? Max replied gruffly. Taxi, I want you to meet Harold. Taxi nodded absently in my direction. How are you feeling today, Max? He asked. Not bad, not bad. Taxi, I said I want you to meet Harold. Once again, Taxi nodded his head in a vague sort of way, not really acknowledging my presence. Of course, at that moment, I was wondering how much longer it would be before my presence became my past, because I could barely catch my breath and my tongue was hanging somewhere around my knees. Had enough? Asked Max, brimming with energy. I guess you have. Come on, let's head for the cooler and take a break. At the community water cooler, my breathing returned to normal and Taxi noticed me at last. Oh, hello, he said, as if seeing me for the first time. Who are you? I'm Harold, I replied. Harold, he said, a puzzled look on his face. Where have I heard that name before? I just introduced you, Max said. Oh. I looked at Taxi. Max was right. He really was on the slow side. Anyway, are you okay, Max? You really feeling all right? Taxi asked. Sure, Max snapped a little irritably. Why do you keep asking? Well, after that fight last night, I mean... Oh, that, Max answered. Taxi and I looked at Max as his face grew red beneath his hair. When he returned our gaze, he looked a little embarrassed and not just a little angry. Ah, women, he uttered. What a nuisance they are sometimes. That Louise can be so unreasonable. I glanced over at Louise's bungalow and saw that she was watching us. I felt a little sorry for her. Max went on, just because Georgette and I have said hello a few times, she thinks we're going to run off together. He looked about him and then in a low voice added, as if we could get out of here even if we wanted to. Taxi nodded his head in sympathy. He looked up at Max with wide eyes and sighed deeply. Must be pretty hard sometimes, he said. Yep, Max grunted. Women. Sometimes I think I'd be better off without 'em. There was a moment of silence. All at once, Taxi's face lit up. Oh, Max, he said excitedly. You just reminded me of this television show I saw last week. The man said just what you did. What's that? Max asked. Women. Sometimes I think I'd be better off without 'em, Taxi repeated. And then what did he say? Max asked. Well, nothing. He murdered his wife. I looked at Taxi. He looked at Max. Max stared straight ahead in the direction of Louise's bungalow. That's terrible, he said softly. Taxi just shrugged his shoulders and began drinking again. He looked up after a moment, water dripping from his lips, and said, I don't think so. I looked at him in surprise. How can you say such an awful thing? I asked. Oh, I wouldn't, Taxi said. But you just did. Did what? Say such a thing. Did I? I was getting confused. Yes, of course you did. You just said it wasn't such a terrible thing for a man to murder his wife. Oh, Taxi said, thinking it over. Well, I guess I must have meant it then. I could see that holding a conversation with Taxi was definitely going to be a challenge. She wasn't a very nice person, Taxi added, as if that made everything okay. Still, that's no reason, I started to say, when Max cut me off. How'd he do it? He asked suddenly, turning his gaze from Louise's bungalow to Taxi. Poison, Taxi answered simply, and then, in her soup. Was Max's only reply. I observed him for a moment. He must have noticed me, for he laughed suddenly and said, "Well, that's one way of handling women, I suppose." "I suppose," I replied, not at all sure I liked being part of this conversation. "Yes," Max went on thoughtfully, "murder is one way. Murder in its infinite varieties. Poison, stabbing, drowning, strangling. Split pea," Taxi interjected. Max and I looked at him. "He put poison in our split pea soup," he explained. "Oh," I said. "Ah," said Max. "Yoo-hoo!" called a new voice. We all turned and saw a tiny white French poodle standing a few feet away. "Georgette," Max whispered. "Good afternoon, Max," Georgette cooed as she approached the water cooler. She smelled of honeysuckle and magnolias. She also smelled of trouble. "How are you doing after that terrible fight? I just felt so awful bad about it I couldn't sleep a wink all night worrying about you." And here she yawned, showing us, I gathered, how much she had suffered on Max's account. "Don't believe a word of it," Taxi whispered to me. Max started pawing the ground self-consciously. "Ah, shucks," he said at last. "I'm fine today, thanks for asking." "Oh, that's silly," Georgette replied. "What is?" Max asked, grinning openly now. "Thanking me for caring about you," Georgette answered. "Ah, shucks," Max said again. It struck me that when Georgette came around, Max's vocabulary tended to suffer. It was then that I noticed Louise had joined us. "Ha!" she exclaimed. "Ah, shucks," says Monsieur Max. "I came over here to tell you that I am, how you say, sorry that we have had our little fight." And what do I hear? "Aw, shucks." Well, mon ami, is this what you will say when I am no longer around, eh? Aw, shucks, because if you think you are going to be able to keep this up much longer with Hester Prynne here... "Georgette," Georgette said softly. "Georgette? Hester? What am I carrying? If you think you can have your Louise and your Mademoiselle, aw, shucks, too, you are sadly misshapen." I think she meant to say mistaken, but at this point she was so overwrought, it was understandable that the word came out wrong. I wanted to console her, but she left us with a grand flourish before anyone, including Max, could speak. Just as she was about to reach her bungalow, however, Lyle suddenly pounced on her back. "Bombs away!" he cried. Louise screamed. "What are you doing? You're a very crazy cat, you nutty Lyle, you. Get off me this instant." Lyle didn't seem to be paying any attention to Louise's screams. In fact, it appeared that he was talking to someone else entirely. "Ace 1 to 4-7, come in 4-7, have bombed the target area, meeting resistance, Roger, over and out." Max ran over to Louise to help. "Lyle," he commanded, "stop this at once." "Don't you be helping me," Louise cried. "I will take care of myself, merci you very much." Max backed off, tucking himself as far into his sweater as possible. Louise turned her head around so that she was staring directly into Lyle's eyes. Lyle mumbled under his breath as if talking into a headset. Enemy contact, stand by, mayday, mayday." "Now you listen to me," Louise said in a low, threatening tone. Lyle's eyes went wild, and he stopped talking immediately. "We all know about you here. Do not think we are playing the fools. You have been driving us all... What is it? Ah, yes, pineapples." "I think she means bananas," Georgette whispered across the way to no one in particular. "But I, for one, have had enough. Do you understand me, Monsieur Lyle? Enough pineapples you have driven me. You will not make me into a fruit salad. Now get off my back and do not ever use me again for a landing stripe." Lyle hissed at her and jumped off her back. He dashed to the other side of the compound, and then he turned suddenly and faced her. "You haven't seen the end of me, toots," he shouted. "No one talks to Lyle like that and gets away with it." "You were not frightening me, Monsieur Bombs Away," Louise yipped back. There was a sudden crash of thunder, which shook us all. No one spoke for a few seconds, and then there came a deep rumbling sound. I thought at first it was more thunder, then I realized it was coming from Lyle's direction. I looked at him. He was growling at Louise. From somewhere deep in his throat he said, "I don't like being cross, sister. Just watch out." He stared at her coolly, and Louise, momentarily stunned, stared back. She looked frightened, and I wondered for the first time if indeed there was a reason for her to be.